Good evening, everyone. Tonight we have two authors joining us from London. How exciting is that? Laura Sebastian, whose new book, Half Sick of Shadows, is her first adult fantasy novel. And in it, she revisits King Arthur and his legendary court, Camelot, all that good kind of thing. And it's a different look. I'm fascinated. I have to tell you, Laura, I'm fascinated with the different permutations. I mean, I can still remember when I was like a sophomore at Stanford reading the Once and Future King, and what an absolute shock that was, to take on that view of Lancelot, who, we always think of as a much more parfait and genteel knight. And just today, or no, Sunday, I don't know if you saw it, but there was an article in, I'm trying to remember something, about The Green Knight, which is premiering on the 31st, so this weekend, which is a different look, I gather, on Sir Gawain and a quest and a different look at it. So there's something about the whole King Arthur thing that allows many interpretations, many stories, and because of the multiplicity of characters, you can fasten upon different ones. So in your case, it's the Lady of Shalott, who has interested you the most writing this book. So I find the whole thing fascinating. And I have to tell you, before I sign off and let you introduce your friend and the two of you talk, that towards the end, I was thinking a great deal about the end of The Lord of the Rings, when the elven people are riding west. And, it's clear that there's going to be a clear delineation between the world of Fae and the world of humans. And I'm not sure whether Tolkien was trying to grasp that same thing as when the magic is leaving the world, or how difficult the interface is between people who are magic and people who are not. So I'm sure you have lots to talk about. So I'm going to take myself dark here for a little while and let the two of you talk. So please take over.
Great. Well, hello. Thank you guys for joining us today.
Yes, thank you for having us. We are in London, so it is 1 a.m. here. I just want to put that disclaimer out there.
So we look like dazed. It's because we are, but we're happy to be
we're
here.
really excited. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, my name's Sasha Alsberg. I'm the #1 New York Times bestselling author of the Andromeda Saga, which I wrote with my friend Lindsay Cummings. And I'm also a YouTuber over on the channel A Book Utopia. So I'm so happy to be here in conversation with you, talking about your newest release, which I am literally in love with. All your books are spectacular, but each one keeps on getting better and better. And this is your first really debut into the adult world. So how does that feel?
So it's funny to me because this is a book that I started writing when I was 17.
Mm-hmm.
And so for the longest time, I imagined it as YA. And then it felt like as I grew up and I kind of kept revisiting the story, it was almost like the characters grew up with me. And so the lens kind of shifted, and it happened almost organically in a way. I wasn't really thinking about it. And I think my agent was like, no, I think this is adult.
Yeah, it's a book that grew with you rather than apart from you.
Exactly.
Yeah,
yes.
Sometimes like when writing books, it feels like you're chasing a narrative that no longer may be there. So you have to evolve and change with it, just as long as the story, will roll with the punches.
Yes,
it's super fun.
There's still a lot of remnants of many older drafts of the book, specifically in the flashbacks, because it's told in 3 timelines. There's the present tense that takes up the bulk of the book, and then there's the flashbacks. And then there are also some flash forwards with Elaine's visions, because she is an oracle.
This book is so intricate, and just talking about it with you, and just like when you're friends with any author, you guys tend to talk about each other's books often, and the way that your mind works, especially seeing it out on the page after listening to you talk about your books, it's fascinating. Your mind has to juggle so many points of views and characters. So let's start at the beginning. So Arthurian mythology is really intense. There's so many different stories, and a lot of people think about King Arthur when they think about Arthurian mythology. So what led you to write about the Lady of Shalott, and why did you pick her instead of any of the other more notable characters that people tend to think about when considering this mythology?
So this is such a complicated question to answer.
Yeah. Especially
Because-
at 1 a.m.
But again, the first few times I tried to write it, actually, I think the first time I started writing this, so the story was from Guinevere's point of view.
Oh, wow.
And then it switched into being all three. It was Elaine, Guinevere, and Morgana.
Yeah.
And it kind of shifted between the three of them. And I realized writing it that I just connected so deeply with Elaine's voice.
Mhm.
And so it got to the point where I think it was probably about 10 years ago that I just sat down and her first line came to my
Mhm.
mind, which is I will die drowning, and it's always been known. And from that moment forward, I really just connected with Elaine's voice and decided to dive deep and really commit to that point of view. But I've always loved Lady of Shalott since high school.
Yeah.
And I personally, as a very depressed teenager who primarily lived through books, I connected with that. It felt like a great metaphor for how I felt as a teenager, because I felt like I was kind of, rather than a mirror, I felt like I was really just living through the books I read.
Yeah.
And so I just really related to her, but I always hated the ending. And it wasn't until years later that I really understood why I hated the ending,
Mhm.
because it's a very sexist poem in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. It's for those who aren't familiar, the Lady of Shalott is about a woman who is cursed to remain in a tower, weaving at a loom, and she can only see the world outside through a mirror that reflects the window behind her. So she can never even look directly out the window. She can only see life reflected, not even secondhand, but third hand. And then one day Lancelot is riding past her window, and she is so immediately struck by love that she turns, looks out the window, and is immediately cursed to die. And that's it. And then she ends up escaping the tower, floating down a river, and just dying in the boat on the way down the river. And then Lancelot sees her, and he's never seen her before because he didn't realize that the whole falling in love thing happened. He was kind of oblivious, and he sees her and he basically says, "Oh, it's pity she's dead. She was pretty hot." And like that's the end of the poem. I'm paraphrasing, but that's the gist of it.
I like your your version of it.
I think it's like
really
actually like she had a pretty face or something, but like the gist was
she's
like
hot. It's a shame.
Shame she's dead. But yeah, I always really loved that poem, and I wanted to see how I could make it stronger and more, because I think the beauty of Arthurian mythology in general is that it's always grown with the times.
Yeah.
It's always shifted and changed. There is no one true version. It always reflects the atmosphere of the day, the politics of the day, and sometimes it's straight up propaganda of the day.
Mhm.
And so I kind of wanted to modern, and I felt like she kind of got stuck in the Victorian era because she was very popular. She was a very popular figure in the Victorian era, which was when the Tennyson poem was written. She was a favorite of the pre-Raphaelite painters. There's the famous painting of her was written in that time. There are several, but there's the famous one of her in the boat floating down.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I wanted to modernize her because I feel like she kind of got stuck in that era and we kind of forgot her there.
Yeah, and we kind of just let especially female characters kind of just like be what is on the page when really there's so much more added to that you just have to dig into. And so going off of that, like retellings can be really hard to master, especially when staying true to it, but also having your own, pathway to the story and, stemming off from it. So how'd you kind of tackle that? And were you kind of hesitant to go into it, worry that somebody would come at you saying maybe like, oh, this is not done in the right way?
Oh yeah. There were two fears I had really going into it. And it was really two sides of the same coin, which is I was afraid that readers who were big fans of King Arthur and had read everything would be angry at me for changing things. They changed quite a bit. You have to.
Yeah.
I think in order to be true, to tell the best story. And that was always my focus, was telling the best story. And there were things that I changed.
Yeah.
Like Mordred in the book is Arthur's bastard brother rather than his son, just because timeline wise, I didn't want to tell this decades long epic. I kind of wanted to condense the timeline, and to do that, I had to change some timeline things. And so I changed that. There were other things that shifted as well. But I was worried that people would be upset about that. But on the flip side of that, I was worried that people who were coming into it with no knowledge of Arthurian mythology at all would be confused by things.
Yeah.
So and at the end of the day, I just had to tell the best story I could.
Yeah.
And trust the reader.
that is really important, especially when you've been working on it for 10 years,
Yeah.
right? So like when you're working on a novel, I know that a lot of people do write novels for long expanses of time,
Mhm.
but you know, making sure that you have a good endpoint to stop at can be difficult, especially when it's
Yeah.
so many years in between. So how did you know the pathway towards it, especially when it was, a decade long?
I mean, it's still difficult for me now because the book has been
Mhm.
out now for 3 weeks. I can't
Oh
do
my
math.
God.
It's 1 a.m. I can't do math even in normal times.
Yeah, me neither.
But I think it's been out 3 weeks.
Wow.
2.5. Three,
Yeah, 2.5.
2.5. Okay.
Yeah, I think
I'll trust you on that.
maybe.
But yeah, so it's been out for a few weeks. We'll say that. And it's still weird to me that I can't change things. Like if I have an idea and I'm like, oh, I should revisit that scene and like maybe approach it from a different angle. And I have to remind myself that, oh no, it's done.
It's done.
It's out in the world. There's no fiddling with it anymore. And I've been fiddling with it for almost half my life.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to stop.
It's always difficult to stop.
Yeah.
Even when you're in like copy edits, which is like the very end of the whole entire writing process. And you could be going through the copy edits, you start line by line, and then you can see a point where you're like, oh, that would be great. Let me move it, but you're not allowed to.
Yes.
So you can't be doing those things.
Yeah. And like I've had that happen with my first 3 books, the Ash Princess series, but like this was on a whole other level just because I was so used to just being able to kind of like put it aside, which I think was an important thing. And the only reason that it's coming out now, I didn't power through it for 13, 14 years, but I did set it aside and come back to it when I was ready. And it's so weird to me now that I'm not like, it's done.
It's done and it's out of like the way, it's in readers' hands.
Yeah. And I'm really proud of the book as it is, but it's just so weird that I can't fiddle with it anymore.
Yeah, especially because it's a completely new aspect to your writing career as well. Like, adult is very different from young adult. And like, what were the biggest changes for you, especially coming from such an extensive young adult background and, going into adult?
So it's weird because I think she's, you want to go down? she's very confused. She's like, why aren't we in bed? But question, YA versus adult. So the assumption that I think most people have that I talk to whenever I talk about going from YA to adult is that there's more violence, there's more language, there's more sexual content than YA. And actually comparing this to the Ash Princess series, that's not the case.
Yeah.
I don't think there's as much violence in this. I think like the sexual content is about the same. It's more the journey.
Yeah.
And I think it really depends on the person you ask. Everyone's gonna have a different answer to this question. But for me, I think the YA journey is characters who are figuring out their place in the world. It's coming of age stories. And with adults, it's characters who know their place in the world. They might seek to change it, or they might be struggling with where that is, but they know their place in the world. And I think that's kind of the difference in approaching that journey. So Elaine in this, for the most part, knows where she kind of fits into the story, and she's negotiating it.
Yeah.
And she's kind of fighting it and kind of trying to figure out how to change it. But she knows like where she fits in the story.
Yeah, and she's such a wonderful character, I have to say. Like, you can tell that you really put a lot of thought and effort into her because she has so many dimensions. And so when you came to crafting her, I know that you said that, you based a lot of her off of yourself, or like there's a lot that comes from your heart that you put into it. So when it came to crafting her character, did you have to think about, in the context of society today, like we really want to have empowered female characters, but, it's one of those things that still has to be broken through in, the world that we live in today. We need to have like these empowering females, but without having, they don't always have to have a sword with them, for example.
Right. I love kind of examining and re-examining what.
Even though she does have a sword.
She does have a sword. I don't think she ever has a sword in the book, but she has a sword on the cover.
I once put a sword in my book just so I can maybe have it on the cover, and it never was.
I mean, it's a King Arthur book. We gotta have Excalibur on there.
There we go.
And she's carrying it like she's never used a sword before. Like that's like a very like nonchalant sword pose. Like I went to theater school, so I did take stage combat classes, and every time I see this cover, I love it. I think it's gorgeous, but I always think that my stage combat teacher would be
horrified.
yeah, if I was carrying like a sword like that, I would
You're like, you're
definitely,
cutting yourself.
I could like hear his voice in my head. He would be very upset. But it makes for a very cool cover. But the question was,
It's 1 a.m.
was about empowered female characters. And I think what I try to do as an author, and one of my themes that I'm constantly revisiting, is what makes a strong female character. Because I think the answer is there's no one size fits all.
Yeah.
And with this, the thing I love about it is even though it focuses on Elaine and it's told from her point of view, Guinevere and Morgana are also very prominent characters, and they all are kind of, I mean, I almost said different sides of the same coin, but I guess it's like if it's a 3-sided coin, I guess.
It's like a trinity almost. Yeah. Oh, die. That's
like a triple. It's 1 a.m. But yeah, so they're all strong female characters, but they're strong in different ways.
Yeah.
And they all have different strengths. They all have different weaknesses, and they really have, and the 3 of them with Arthur and Lancelot have this kind of codependent relationship with each other, where none of them really know kind of how to survive without each other. And I think that was a really fun thing to explore relationship wise.
Yeah, especially dynamics between men and women in books like this, especially when they're pre-existing characters almost, you would think, but like, they have their own liberties and their own experiences, and that's what makes it super fun. So
yeah. And that was the especially with this book, because one thing that I struggled with originally was the reason I decided to make Elaine an oracle was because I knew our readers would be coming in with some understanding of Arthurian mythology, even if that understanding is only that that Guinevere and Lancelot have an affair. Like, I feel like if you know nothing else about Arthurian mythology, you know that.
Yeah.
And so I knew it would be really difficult to get readers invested in Elaine as a character and in her relationship with Lancelot, because you know how it ends. And so how can you root for a couple if you know that it's going to end in heartbreak?
Exactly.
It's difficult. So I wanted Elaine to know that too.
Yeah.
And so the concept of her as an oracle came about. And it also kind of throws her other relationships with Arthur, with Morgana, with Guinevere into a different light, because she kind of she's basically waiting for the straw to break the camel's back.
Yeah.
Like every time something happens, she's like, is this the thing that's going to shatter us? And
that's a lot of pressure.
It's a lot of pressure. And like, I realized I gave this book to a friend, I think maybe a couple of years ago. And it was very similar to what's here, but she read it and she goes, you realize you wrote a book about anxiety, right? And I hadn't realized that. But once she said it, I was like, oh no, that's what it is. That's how my anxiety feels, is exactly that.
Oh my gosh. Well, talking about anxieties, getting a book out there in the world is always really nerve-wracking, but I think that we need to talk about the amazing blurbs that you do have a part of your book. So many incredible authors reviewed her book, and it's on the back of it, and she does have some incredible authors. If you do want to highlight one, I think that, like, honestly, the one by Kate Quinn is truly magnificent, calling you the next Madeline Miller, which is so cool. Like,
especially because my dog, the dog who was up on my lap for a while, she's named Cersei. So it is after the Madeline Miller book.
It's so cool. Like,
the highest praise, it really is.
Yeah. Do you have like a lot of like nerves when it comes to your friends reading your books, or just like your idols, or just everybody in between?
Yeah, just the thought of anyone reading my book, honestly, is enough to kind of send me into a minor like panic. Even like my dad, like I would, every time I call him, he's like, oh, I'm making progress on your book. Like I got up to this chapter. Because my dad, he doesn't really like fantasy books. So like, I'm always shocked that he reads it at all. And of course he's read all my books, but every time he calls me, he's like, so I'm at this part. I'm like, oh, you're reading it.
Thank you.
So it's always a shock. But yeah, so I get that way with it whenever anyone tells me they're reading my book, but friends too, because like there's always that kind of added pressure with friends where like, oh, are they going to hate it so much they don't want to be my friend anymore? And it's a fear.
Yeah, I don't want to be
rational fear.
Actually, I hate your book. I don't want to be your friend anymore. Never again. So talking about on a lighter note, well, that's not a dark note, it's just a nerve-wracking one.
It's a very anxiety-inducing note.
So when it comes to, well, this is another anxiety inducing thing, which is like, once your book's done, what's next? A book cover.
Mhm.
And Laura's other dog is
he getting
rustling
into-
around in the paper.
He likes to sleep like on top of my printer. It's a whole thing.
He's special. But so when it comes to like the covers of your books, like that's the last thing that people usually think about when it comes to the books, because
Yeah.
it's the final thing. It makes the book a book. So like authors don't always have a say when it comes to their book covers. It's a very rare thing that authors even get input or are able to say yes or no to a book cover that's presented before them. And then some other authors have like really close one-on-one communication with any artist or whatnot. So what was your process for this book and how did it differ from your others?
So I am the first to admit I know nothing about graphic design. I know nothing about illustration, art. I went to an art college, so like I had to take like art history and things, which again is kind of how I really got into Lady of Shalott and the pre-Raphaelite paintings. But when it comes to actually like design, I just like look at things and I'm like, oh yeah, that looks great.
Yeah.
But I'm not. I think we talked briefly about kind of things we wanted on this cover, specifically, and like the sword was one of them, where we wanted a symbol that kind of tied it into Arthurian mythology, so that if you looked at it, you knew what you were getting into.
Yeah.
And we talked about having Elaine on the cover, but like when they sent me this, I was honestly blown away because it's gorgeous.
It's incredible. I think that you've had like some of the most stunning covers in the
I've
past
gotten
year.
really
especially.
lucky. I've gotten so lucky.
Yeah.
And then with the Ash Princess covers, they just sent me those like out of the blue. I had no input on those, but every time
They're,
they
like,
sent it to me, I was like,
iconic.
oh my God, gorgeous.
So if you had to put all of your characters, all your main characters from each one of your books into a fighting ring, who would make out alive?
Guinevere would.
Guinevere?
I feel like from sheer fighting skills,
Yeah.
she would.
Not Morgana?
Well, Morgana has her magic, so it kind of depends on like the setting of this fighting ring.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to spoil anything, but she could. There's a scene like
Mhm.
she could hold her own.
Yeah.
And then from Ash Princess, I would think Artemisia would really probably power through beyond Theo. That's the thing. Like I feel like
Yeah.
my like main characters are usually like more less actiony, more like conniving, and
Yeah.
I feel like that wouldn't really serve you in that
No,
environment.
definitely not.
If you're like, let's see who can find their way out of like this labyrinth with all of these tests first, I would say probably Elaine and Theo and Sophronia in my new series that comes out in February.
It's incredible, the cover.
Oh yeah,
the
we have
plot.
that one too.
We should plug that while we're at it.
Just
It's
I
stunning.
don't know if we could. There we go.
Another great cover.
Yeah, oh yeah, another one I had absolutely nothing to do with. They just sent it to me and I was like, gorgeous.
And that one's young adult.
That one's young adults as well. It's the first in a new series. It's called Castles in Their Bones. And it comes out February 4th.
It comes out on a
It
date.
comes out the first Tuesday of February. Again, 1 a.m. But yeah, no, I've gotten really lucky with covers for
Yeah.
sure.
And yeah.
Oh, and then the characters fight in the fighting pit. That was the other question. But yeah, no, I
It was
think
fun. to
yeah.
think about like who would survive and who
yeah. And then I think Blaze would be the other one who I think would. Blaze and Lancelot would probably be the ones. Arthur would probably do okay.
wouldn't. Yeah.
But I think Arthur's like, I think Arthur would be too preoccupied with like making sure everyone else is okay.
Yeah.
Like I
okay,
don't
we're
think
fine.
right. I think he would be too worried. And Lancelot honestly probably would be too. I think Blaze is the one that would probably kind of yeah.
So in a book this like intricate, like and everything, what was the hardest thing for you to kind of like overcome with it? Like what was the hardest theme, character, plot line? What was the hardest thing in this whole entire novel for you to do?
So I mentioned before that the book is told in 3 tenses. It's told in mostly in present tense, and there's flashbacks and also visions that are told in future tense. So one of the first lines is "I will die drowning." So it's like that kind of, which I is not. I don't know if it's really. I'm sure it's been done. There's so many books in the world. I'm not going to claim that I pioneered that, but I didn't have enough of a frame of reference to be able to do it naturally. So it felt very, there were times when I did not think it was going to work, and it felt very like risky for me, and especially weaving it all together. at times felt very confusing. It was like putting together quilts in ways and trying to make sure that the reader, even if you weren't showing everything, that the reader still understood everything that was going on.
Like the patches.
Yeah. But there were times I really didn't think it was going to work. I thought it was too confusing. I thought it was too ambitious, and I didn't think I was a good enough writer to pull it off. And and I mean, it took a lot of help. It took a lot of feedback, but we eventually got it to the point where it is today. And I'm really proud of how it turned out.
So with that being said, you mentioned how you thought it would never come to be. So what would you tell other writers who are kind of in that kind of like pit of despair, thinking that this book that they're working on is the project of their heart and soul, but they can't get through to it and they don't think it's worth it in the end, even if they want to write it? So how do you kind of like overcome that, and what's your advice to them?
I mean, it's not advice I think anyone really wants to hear, but put it aside. Set it aside for a few months, work on something new. As a writer, if you want a career, you're always going to have to be working on the next thing.
Yeah.
And it's good to get in practice right away. So Ash Princess, which is my first published book, was the 10th book I wrote, 10th book I finished. And
wow.
Yeah, so I queried all of those books, most of them. I think there was one or two that I got to the point where I should have been querying, and I was like, no, this is not.
Yeah.
But most of them I queried, most of them I got, I think I amassed close to 400 rejections total.
400.
Yeah.
That's actually it's not uncommon to hear authors say a number like that.
Yeah,
it was very common.
And I don't think I have all of them, because a lot of agents don't even like
email you back. They said if you don't respond within this amount of time, it's usually a no.
And the first book I queried was in 2008. And that was kind of the crossover between postal queries and email queries. So like most of the agents I queried were accepting email queries, but there were like a solid, I would say like 30% that only accepted postal queries only. So I had to like take them into like the post office, my college post office. And oh gosh, sorry, my dog might start barking. No, we're good. But I didn't think anyone would be out at like 2 a.m. It's fine. But yeah, so I had to take it to post, and so I got 400 rejections. And the thing I learned, as soon as I started querying a book, I was always writing a new book, because it kind of took the sting out of all of the rejections for me, because I was already mentally invested in the next thing and not so much in the thing that I had just done.
Yeah.
And so the rejections, when I got these things that were like, oh, we don't like your book, it was always like, oh, you're talking about that other book. Yeah, I don't have an emotional connection to that book right now because I'm working on this new one. And so I think it's always helpful to always be working on the next thing. You can always revisit those things again.
Yeah.
But I think it helps to kind of disconnect a little bit and get a little more perspective. So when you come back to it, you have a fresher mind.
Exactly. And so talking about, how late it is here and everything, you moved to London.
Yes.
And was that a huge shift in your writing schedule? Was it hard getting into a routine here as an author who was in New York, which is also a big city?
Yeah.
So, but it's very different over here. So how was that kind of like transitional period for you while tackling deadlines, moving across the ocean with 2 dogs
in the middle of a
pandemic? I know, I did it too. The exact same thing, but still it's hard.
It's hard. I will say the thing I really like about being over here is that I feel like I have a head start on the day.
Yeah.
Because I don't get any emails from like publishing people or my agent or any like social media things going on until like 3. Yeah. So I feel like I get like a whole day of writing before I have to remember to answer emails and things like that. So it's kind of nice not to have the distractions while I'm writing.
Exactly. And it is your full-time job now.
It is my full-time job now. Yeah.
And it is a actual full-time job that people can pursue, which is something that a lot of
I got very lucky with that. Yeah. I know it's not something that a lot of authors are able to do. And I am extremely grateful that I have that opportunity.
Exactly. And talking about other authors, what books would you recommend to people who enjoyed Half Sick of Shadows? Because it's such a unique book, yes, but I bet there's some books out there that might be reminiscent of it, if you have any in mind.
So if you like the familiar mythology from a new voice. I think Circe is probably,
Yeah.
I'm assuming most people have probably read Circe. Ariadne was another one. I cannot off the top of my head remember the author's name on that, which is gonna, thought I had it right here. I don't. Oh yeah, no, it's right here. Jennifer Saint.
Oh,
Ariadne by Jennifer Saint is from the point of view of Ariadne,
amazing.
who so that was a really great one. I think that's, I'm trying to remember. There have been a few. There's also The Witch's Heart by Genevieve Gornichuk. I'm hoping I'm saying that right, which is a retelling of Norse mythology from the point of view of Loki's wife.
That's incredible.
So that's another good one. Yeah, I feel like we're really in like the golden age of like feminist retellings of things.
I know.
It's been the last
You
couple of
never
years,
know.
which thank you, Madeline Miller, because I feel like
Yeah.
she primarily made that possible.
Right.
But and then if you want more Arthurian mythology, there's so much good stuff out right now. There's
Really?
Sword Stone Table. Did I get those words in the right order? Which just came out.
Maybe.
I think it came out 2 weeks ago, a
Mhm.
week ago. And it's a short story collection. And that's really fantastic. It's from a whole bunch of amazing authors across genres, across backgrounds. It's phenomenal. And I also really loved Kirsten White's Guinevere Deception.
Yeah.
Which is a retelling from Guinevere's point of view. It's a trilogy. I think the third book is out soon, but all three are
Yeah.
you can almost read the whole series is what I'm trying to say.
Exactly.
And then also E.K. Johnston has a sci-fi retelling of the Fisher King, which is related to Arthurian mythology as well, called Etherbound.
I love just retellings and how many how it can really transcend different genres because it's such a versatile thing.
I mean, I feel like in some ways everything has like a little nugget of retelling. Everything is in
Tropes especially.
Even original work is always in conversation with something else.
Yes.
And whether or not that's intentional, whether it's just we're consuming art and reacting to it however we can, I think there are always like familiar nuggets in any work.
Right.
But with retellings, it's obviously a little more obvious, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
There's another word that's escaping me.
So like they can be more obvious, and like it also is obvious tropes. So what is like your favorite trope in your book?
Gosh.
And then what is your favorite trope in general that you love to see in books?
So my favorite trope in this book. Ooh.
I got her tripped up.
I genuinely, I feel like it's found the found family trope.
Yeah.
Because this book definitely the center of it's a found family. And it's a dysfunctional found family at times. And it's,
family isn't
right. But it's a very, I think it's probably the found family trope. And I think we also see characters because they basically Elaine, Guinevere, Morgana, Arthur, and Lancelot have basically been sequestered on this island since they were children. And now they're in Albion and coming face to face once again with their blood family. And we kind of see how those tensions, there's like the give and pull of loyalty there. That I found really interesting to write.
I really like that. And a lot of us authors, we always dream that like our books would be adapted into something. And I know that Arthurian mythology has been adapted.
Wait, I didn't answer the second part of your question.
Oh, you didn't?
My favorite trope in general.
Oh, yes, that's a very important
because I wanted to answer this one.
I'm so interested in what it will be.
My favorite trope in general. I do love a good like. I think we've kind of discussed now that it's not hate to love, but it's like bickering, like they like
bickering,
that
like,
instant like dislike to love,
but like I can
like the bickering, and I haven't written into any book. There's a little bit of it in Ember Queen, but it didn't really. And there's a little bit.
I made them wait.
There's a little bit in this, but it really comes into force in Calluses in Their Bones. So I finally got to write it in the next one, my fifth book. Fourth book, fifth.
I want to get to the point where I forget how many books I publish.
I mean, luckily, we're only at 5. I think it's mostly that it's 1 a.m. and
she said that she's bad at math, so we have to believe her.
Yeah.
So, okay. So a lot of us authors want our things to be adapted, but also some of us authors do not, because it's like our book babies. We don't want it to be
Yeah.
done dirty, but also it's cool seeing it adapted. So if you can get it adapted from a TV show or a movie or a comic series or a play, which one would you choose?
Oh.
Can only pick one.
So I'm gonna like take like a little bit of a hard left here and say a play.
Yeah.
Just because I have my background in theater and in I studied it in college and studied directing and all of these, and like I've seen all the ways that you can really use theater to kind of, I feel like there's a suspension of disbelief in theater that isn't really available in film and television. Like I feel like, especially when it comes to things like fantasy effects, our threshold for disbelief is so much higher. And where I feel like in theater, you can kind of get away with more and be a little more like artistic with things and be a little more like, you can hint at things. And I feel like it would be really cool to see how a director would show Elaine's visions in theater. I feel like that would be really fascinating to kind of see how that would be interpreted.
Oh, you know what? That would be really incredible.
Yeah.
I could see them getting like waves or
Ideally, I would love it to be a musical. But that would be fun. I just love a good musical.
Yeah.
I would love to be able to like,
happy.
I just like would love to be able to listen to like my original Broadway soundtrack while writing. I feel like that would just be
pretty incredible, to be honest.
Yeah.
So are we close on time?
Fine. I just thought that, I'd stick around in case you began to think that I'd abandoned you.
Good to know you haven't.
And I was also thinking about Camelot as a musical.
Yeah. So that
it would be interesting. I do have a question, which is, you've chosen this to be an adult novel, having written for young adults. What's the difference, and how do you pitch a story? How do you see it's different writing an adult fiction as opposed to a young adult? Because I think a lot of fantasy can appeal to an enormously wide age range.
Yeah, I think I know I have a lot of adult readers with my YA series, and I think that there's no reason teenagers can't read this. I know I read a lot of adult fantasy books in high school. I think there's really, the line between the two is very flexible, but I do think that YA, the journey the characters are going through is them trying to figure out who they are and where they belong in the world. And I think with adults, the characters tend to already have an idea of those things, and they might be trying to change them, but the journey is different.
I think that's a very good discussion. One of the things I've always found so difficult with the Arthurian legend is trying to work out Guinevere. You fastened upon Lady of Shalott, but have you thought a lot about Guinevere and why it is that she started off in one direction and then seemed to veer in another one, or was it always there? What's your feeling about her? I
think all of them are fascinating, and I think the thing with Guinevere is that I think for so long she's really been a character who's been painted so many different ways depending on the era she's written in. Right. She's been this kind of romantic heroine at times, but I think primarily before that, she was this woman who destroyed a country by having an affair. She was really kind of the blame was laid on her. Lancelot kind of got his comeback story by coming back into battle with Arthur, but Guinevere just kind of like has her affair and then like skitters off to a nunnery and we never hear from her again. So I think there's so many different ways of viewing Guinevere, whether she did it because she was she had this affair because she was flighty and just unsatisfied with her life, or if she did it because she was truly in love. There's so many different ways of exploring that. And I thought about that a lot when writing and which way I was going to take it. And in the end, I don't want to get into spoiler territory here, but I left it a little open in a way, because I kind of wanted to present possibilities and have the reader kind of fill it in themselves.
Well, I think you could think, that's the stupid way. Sorry, let me start over again. One could think that if this is based on any kind of actual history, Celtic legend, whatever it is, and there was this wonderful kingdom, and then it disappeared, vanished, was vanquished, whatever way you want to look at it. Maybe Guinevere is just a convenient explanation for what happened, rather than, I mean, how much of this is based on anything that did happen, and how much of this is an explanation for things, in the way that Greek mythology, so many of the stories. I mean, when I was like in 5th grade, I had memorized Bullfinch's mythology. And I was really interested when years later, Rick Riordan and I were wandering around El Paso at a convention. He said to me, I've had this idea because I was reading something to my daughter, and I realized that she didn't know anything about the Greek myths. And so he said, what do you think if I were to write a children's version of Bullfinch, and I went, oh, might work. And there we are. And, having gone from the Greek, he's wandered off into, the Norse legends. And I mean, he's made a whole thing out of bringing back, but he's done it for a young adult audience rather than an adult audience. But I often wonder how much of all of these myths were explanations for natural events or explanations for historical events when there wasn't really any good way to otherwise explain them.
Yeah, I definitely think that's the case with a lot of mythologies, but I haven't noticed anything like that with Arthurian specifically. I think it's usually just a lot of times it's been used as almost political propaganda in a sense.
Right.
More so like the like I said, the Guinevere's motivations shifting was in line with society's kind of views on love and marriage that kind of evolved with that. And actually Guinevere herself, I cannot remember now, but she ended up being based on Eleanor of Aquitaine after a certain point. So that was like this because she was the queen who really brought this romantic idea of courtly love to her courts, and so she ended up kind of becoming this figurehead that a lot of people kind of associate with Guinevere now. So it's interesting to see how the legend has evolved really to take up this what we know now. Even the idea of this kind of fraternal order of the round table and like these friendly brothers in arms is relatively modern. A lot of the older stories have them really at each other's throats. There are full-on blood feuds between them. They did not really get along for a really long time, and now we kind of view them as like this friendly band of brothers. But it's interesting to see how it really has evolved with the times. There is no one true version.
Well, Mallory wrote Le Morte d'Arthur in 1485, a long time ago. And I agree with you that these things keep mutating as society keeps changing. And it occurs to me that a lot of the books that you've just been talking about, Madeline Miller and so forth, most of them are written by women and with an effort to put women's voices and women's roles more to the fore. And this is my least favorite word aside from pivot that's currently being in use, but agency. I'm really tired of this whole, giving women agency, but maybe it's great shorthand for saying that we don't hear women's voices in history.
Yeah.
Most history is in fact written by men, and it's interpreted by men. And so I've been thinking that the last maybe 20 years or something, there's been a real effort to bring these historical interpretations, stories, whatever it is, to the fore with women as the lead characters rather than men.
Yeah, and I think I think with the Arthurian mythology in particular, for so much of it, the women are honestly they're really either used in service of the men, where they're there to be damsels in distress or literally prizes at the end of a quest or things like that, or they're the ones who destroy everything. There's Morgana Le Fay, who is seducing her brother and trying to undermine him and murder him and all of these things. And they're really one or the other. There's no one who's really existing for their own goals. Or
Yeah, it's the real temptress thing. I mean, it's Adam and Eve, and Eve was the one that went after, with the snake and so forth. So there's a tendency to blame women, virtuous men, thrown off track by tempting women. And then on the other hand, there's the whole virtuous woman thing designed to redeem men or hold things together or carry on, whatever it might be. It is interesting, and it's fun to see things change as society has changed. I mean, I'm at least twice, probably 3 times your age, and it's interesting for me to see what you're doing, because I can go all the way back to Arthur Rackham and those kinds of illustrations and a much more Victorian interpretation. So it's fun to see it. Did you guys have any other things you'd like to talk about before Patrick pops in to see if there are any questions from the audience? Because you're certainly welcome to.
Did you have any other questions? No, that's about it.
Okay.
Let's hear from Patrick.
Yeah.
All right, let's see if we can get Patrick. This is our kind of magic moment when we bring him up like Caliban and Ariel to talk to us from the deep. Right, so Patrick, it was really an interesting discussion. Do you want to throw anything in there?
Sure. Let's see. Elena has asked a few questions. There's one that might be possibly a little bit of a spoiler, but she said you can choose whether or not you'd like to discuss this. But she says, "What did the ending mean when Arthur is on the boat with Elaine and Morgana, and it said they'll take him back to Avalon, but his will be a half-life?"
It is a bit of a spoiler.
Should we not talk about that then?
No, I would just say that I think I wanted to leave the ending open, because Arthurian mythology in general has a very open ending. And I wanted to stay as true to that as possible while providing a little hope. And I love a good bittersweet ending. And I wanted to echo the Arthurian, the bittersweet ending that kind of has to take place there, and have that in a way that suited the characters.
Hasn't that always been part of the Arthurian myth that, the sword can, was in the lake, and Arthur probably, we could get him back and bring back that kind of golden age? I mean, I've always thought that was a part of the entire Arthurian legend, is that he might come again. That's why it's called the Once and Future King.
Right, exactly.
And then let's see, Elena also says, "I really enjoyed the different view of," I'm going to get this pronunciation wrong, Nimue. Is that right?
Nimue.
What's that?
Nimue. It's a confusing.
Okay.
I had to put like a pronunciation in the book specifically because everyone was saying Nimue.
It says visually she's described as very different than traditional Arthurian legend. That was pretty cool. She says also my middle daughter is named, what is it, Nimue?
Nimue, yeah.
Nimue. So it was super cool to see her name used exactly in the book.
Well, Nimue was a fun character. She kind of evolved quite a bit, and her motives evolved quite a bit throughout all of the different drafts. And but I honestly, I think I just remember when I was describing her, I just kept thinking of Lupita Nyong'o and just thinking like she kind of captured like really what I wanted Nimue to look like. Oh. And that was really kind of the inspiration for that. And I thought she kind of had that kind of energy I was looking for. It's the only time I've really done that, where I've like cast a real person in my writing. But like once I had that idea, I really couldn't shake it.
Any plans to write a sequel?
No, I'm really happy with where I left it. It's weird for me because all my other things have sequels. So I'm so used to kind of getting in that series mindset. But I don't think there's no more stories to tell. The only thing I think I would do under the right circumstances maybe is do a spinoff with Gareth and Lynette, which is one of my other favorite Tennyson poems. And there's a little nod to it in Half Sick of Shadows, but I would like to retell that possibly, maybe at some point.
There's a question for you. Why is it that Tennyson so attracts you? He's a Victorian poet.
So I think there was a point when I was doing so much research with Arthurian mythology in general and trying to read everything I could get my hands on, and so much of it contradicted each other. there are so many conflicting viewpoints, so much conflicting information, that at one point I was just decided I wanted to focus specifically on one canon to retell and kind of touch as much as possible. And I think there are nods to everything from Mallory to Monty Python, but I wanted to really focus on Tennyson because of the Lady of Shalott, and that was kind of where her poem really became mainstream in a way, and her character became mainstream, and so it just made sense. And I think that's always been my favorite. I've just always loved Tennyson's poems, and I thought it was a good starting place.
Barbara, you remember Sharon McCrum had a book, Sick of Shadows,
Mhm.
long time ago. And then Lorena McKennitt, of course, has that song that sort of popularized the story of the Lady of Shalott. Yeah.
Well, Tennyson was really, he had wonderful rhythm. I mean, it's, his poetry really captures you, and even the image of the moving water and so forth, but his language was so evocative and easy to remember, I think, because of the rhythms of it. But he really expressed a lot of Victorian ideals. And of course, he was, part of that whole William Morris era where, people were, I'm trying to remember which was the model that actually died, floating along in the water near Oxford with her locks in the water.
I think Lizzie Sedal.
Yeah, it was Lizzie Sedal, and then later was dug up because she was buried.
Oh yeah, because her husband. So her husband was Dante Gabriel Rossetti,
right?
And he married her. She was his mistress for a while, and he finally married her, and she died. And he wrote these love poems for her, and he was very dramatic about it. And he said, "I'm going to bury these poems with her, and the world will never see my brilliance." Buried them with her, and like a couple of years later, he was like, "Never mind, dig her up. I want those poems."
Sort of killed the romance, but none.
In some ways, it's like the pre-Raphaelite romanticism, like in a nutshell, is that story.
Right.
So that's what
It's really true. But Rossetti and Burne-Jones, I've always been fond of Burne-Jones. Their paintings and so forth very much went with Tennyson. I think, it was a very romantic. They went back to the medieval. You had that whole movement in the Victorian era, which I think was in part not a protest, but a reaction to the increasing industrialization and, loss of romance in Victorian England. So fascinating stuff.
Burne-Jones has a couple of Lady of Shalott paintings as well, I think.
Yeah.
Or two, yeah.
And that can make you think of Hamlet and Ophelia if you really think about it, very similar imagery. So anyway,
of Ophelia that always gets mislabeled as Lady of Shalott, where she's floating down the river.
Right.
But it's Ophelia. But they were both very popular. I mean, the pre-Raphaelites just loved their drowning girls. Like that was their women on boats. It was just it was a whole aesthetic, I think.
I think you're right, for sure. Anything else, Patrick?
They definitely loved a tragic heroine. Like if a girl died for love, that was kind of the ideal Victorian woman in a way. Wow. That was what everyone wanted to paint. That was what everyone wanted to read about. It was
kind of horrifying.
It is. And that's kind of why I wanted to write this and give a better ending in that way.
Love that.
It's interesting how a lot of that stuff was also popular in the late 60s, kind of early 70s counterculture, the whole pastoral British thing.
It all comes back. Everything circles around again.
Mm-hmm. Just like the 90s.
Yeah.
Well, now it's approaching 2 a.m.
Yeah.
Old Blighty.
Well, you've been noble, both of you, to stay up so late. If I had known you were in England, we could have scheduled this for a whole different time of day. So in the future, I'll try to pay more attention, because we do lots of British authors, but we usually do them at 1 p.m. our time, which would have been kinder to you. So I certainly apologize. In any case, it's been a joy to talk to both of you. A very great pleasure to meet you. Let us recommend Half Sick of Shadows by Laura Sebastian to those of you who may be now totally intrigued by this whole discussion about over centuries, really over centuries. Eleanor of Aquitaine is, what is she, 12th century, and Mallory is 15th century, and then we have 19th century, and layers and layers.
With Once and Future King really changed a lot too. Yeah, it changes everything. Yeah,
it really did. Once and Future King was a real shattering of many types for me. And if any of you have read The Once and Future King and are interested in T.H. White, who was a complicated character, Helen Macdonald's wonderful nonfiction bestseller, H is for Hawk, will tell you an awful lot about the life of T.H. White. And it's an interesting book to pursue because, you know, the life of the author certainly is significant in terms of what he or she chooses to write about and the way they interpret it. So sometimes we learn more about authors than we really want to know. I mean,
Yeah.
that's always the risk of doing Zoom events or any event. I mean, we've been doing events for 31 years, and every once in a while we will have a customer say, I really like that author's work, but we didn't want to come and meet them in case it just ruined it for us, you know. So it's a little bit like pulling the veil aside. And so, but Zoom's a wonderful technology, and we're very lucky that it came along just when it did, so that we can actually do this conversation in a way that wouldn't have been possible. So thank you. Go to bed. For those of you who are watching it in, you know, at a more civilized hour here in the United States, please enjoy the rest of your evening and your weekend. Thanks, ladies, very much.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.